I'm James Rule. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, where we help existing and aspiring leaders find clarity, build resilience, drive performance, and enhance fulfillment. Active listening, the skill that changes everything. Welcome to another edition of the Lonely Leader podcast and a specific feature on one of our key leadership essentials. That is active listening. For those of you who have listened to the back catalogue of the podcast, you'll find a number of episodes under the banner of Leadership Essentials. If it's the first time you've heard it, then just to set some context, I believe that Leadership Essentials are a series of traits that each and every leader should be reflecting upon and actively incorporating into their leadership DNA to maximize their impact as a leader, their performance, and the overall level of performance in the team in which they lead. Active listening is an interesting one to me. It sounds simple, and most leaders are guilty of thinking that they do it well. But in my experience, coaching, training, and consulting with leaders and their teams all around the world, I find that invariably very few of us do it well. Active listening is not just nodding along, waiting for your turn to speak, or looking for the solution that you want to jump in, take control, and present to bring that particular conversation to a conclusion. And that, unfortunately, is where most of us fall down. We nod along, but we're not truly actively listening. We are just waiting for our chance to speak. I think one of the traps that we all fall into, and I know I certainly did early in my leadership tenure, is this deluded notion that we're meant to have all the ideas, that as a leader, when people present a problem, we should jump on the solution, present it succinctly, and then move on to the next challenge or problem. But what that forces us to do is we lose our ability to listen. Instead, we're thinking about how can I offer a solution? We often jump in too quickly, perhaps before the individual has finished articulating the problem, and certainly in my experience, before we've given them a chance to articulate a potential solution. Now, I think deep down, we all know there's a benefit to actively listening, but if I was to pull out two or three, first and foremost, it builds trust, connection. It makes people feel seen. And that imparts a sense of value. And as you hear me talk about repeatedly on all the podcasts, that is Leadership 101. You must make your people feel valued if you want to drive their performance, if you want to build that loyalty, that trust, and ultimately that organizational culture that retains the best talent and indeed helps attract the best talent. You've got to make people feel valued. Underpinning that, you're creating that psychological safety. When people feel that they can express opinions, frustrations, suggestions, and there's a genuine space for them to do that without fear of criticism or ridicule, then you are building that stronger bond, which drives back into that earlier point around creating an attractive, engaging culture. Now, it's very easy to think, well, yeah, I do that, but if you don't give people a chance to speak, if you are not actively listening, if you're closing them down, if you're course correcting them immediately, if you're offering strong opinions to the contrary of their opinion, then all of that sort of stifles that sense of psychological safety. And as a consequence, you're turning off the proverbial tap for innovation. Who says any one of us have the monopoly on ideas? We evidently don't. We need to ensure that that flow of communication and creativity and innovation is constantly open. And when we listen, we encourage people to bring ideas to the fore. And also, equally importantly, people may make suggestions that stimulate a new idea in our thinking. They may have the seed of an idea, but they haven't perhaps got it articulated in its entirety. But by being able to share that initial idea, that embryonic idea, then we can complement that and we can draw in suggestions from other members in our team, and we end up developing a really impactful strategy. But if that innovative flow isn't presented to us in the first place, because we're not actively listening and we're not creating that psychological safety, then we never get a chance to build those truly impactful strategies. And the other thing that I think active listening is so important for is it helps us identify tension. There isn't a team in the world, in business, in sport, in the military, where there isn't tension at some point for a whole raft of reasons. But as a leader, you've got to be tuned into that. And you've got to be able to identify it and diffuse it quickly in the interest of individual performance, collective performance, and that harmony and culture that we talked about earlier on. Now, you can ignore it if you want, but everybody struggles. Performance is affected, the atmosphere in the office, in the team is affected, the ultimate impact on culture is a negative one. So, again, if you needed any sort of rallying call for active listening, hopefully these points will do just that to make you listen in, reflect, and say, yeah, well, I want that. I want trust and connection with my team. I want them to feel valued. I want there to be psychological safety. I certainly want a continual flow of ideas, innovation, creativity coming to my door. And if there is tension in my team, I want to be able to identify it, diffuse it quickly so that we're not wasting energy and bandwidth on tensions and we're all aligned towards the achievement of our key strategic objectives. I just want to make a quick nod to why you may be struggling with active listening. I get a lot of feedback from listeners to the podcast where initially there's a sense of frustration, guilt even to say, I'm listening to James, I don't do this, or this particular trait that he's articulating we should avoid, I do it. And that's not the emotion that I'm trying to generate. None of us are the perfect leader. None of us will walk our path without making some sort of mistakes or errors. The idea behind this podcast is to help you identify some of those roadblocks, some of those dead ends, some of those hazards before you stumble into them. But the reason I'm talking about these topics is because I see them so frequently. So there is zero judgment or criticism if you are struggling to do that. And I'm starting to try and position almost a articulation of, well, why might you be struggling with it? So in my experience, there's a number of key reasons why people are not particularly good at active listening. Well, one is fundamentally distraction. We're just bombarded with a never-ending inbox, to-do list, call list, meeting schedules. It's just really hard to take a moment and say, I'll be truly present and actively listen in this conversation because our mind is pinging in a million different directions and we're always thinking about what else we've got to get done next. And what does that do? Well, it creates an urgency bias. We're always looking for the quickest way to solve a problem, get that particular issue off our to-do list, because we know even while we're in this meeting, the to-do list is getting longer and longer. So we need to try and fight against that and not just look for the quickest solution. And that ties me into another commonly experienced reason for struggling with active listening, and that's that our ego is getting in the way. We think that high performance, being a good leader, is about identifying quick solutions, delivering them, and showing that we're across all the issues, we have all the answers, and we're an all-knowing sage that can immediately take any problem, any tension, and present a solution and diffuse that tension with our deep and insightful answer. Now, on occasions, yes, there will be immediate answers and solutions that you can present, but the key is not to dive in, not to let that urgency bias, not to let our overwhelm from all the distraction push us into the delivery of that solution before we've truly listened and taken the sense check of what's being expressed to us, both the context, the content, and the emotional content and context of that delivery from that particular colleague or team member. So I hope that gives you some degree of justification, if that's the right word to use here, that we're all guilty of being distracted, of trying to pander to our ego and present quick solutions, and being driven by that urgency bias to try to stay on top of that expanding to-do list. As I often reference, I have a passion for reading. I enjoy reading around the subjects that I coach, train, and mentor people on. So I'm always looking out for leaders that epitomize traits, particularly these leadership essentials traits that we talk about. And when it comes to active listening, I always reflect on Phil Jackson, the NBA basketball coach. Many of you have seen recent documentaries on the Chicago Bulls, and he was a coach through a particularly successful period for that franchise. And what stood out was the size of personalities, of their skills, also their egos, and leading that group. Now, he wasn't an individual that was barking orders and trying to dominate and impose his will. One of his skills, and what comes up through players that played underneath him, and you hear it in certain documentaries, books, etc., is that he was very, very good at listening, at giving people space to express themselves, and using that knowledge and insight to develop and retain a high performance culture. So he's a good example that epitomizes one of the challenges that I often see, that when you have a lot of high performers, a lot of alpha personalities, it's easy to jump back into that ego driven urgency bias. I need to give quick solutions. I need to show that I know everything. But no leader can know everything. It's okay not to have all the answers, and to facilitate a discussion within the group to help find those answers. Yes, you can steer and facilitate, but you are not expected to have every answer for every problem every time something is presented to you. This may be the first time you've listened to one of the Lonely Leader podcasts, and if it is, I hope you're enjoying the content. For those regular listeners, you'll know that we always like to weave in some actionable takeaways that you can immediately reflect on and start adapting into your day-to-day leadership style. So the first tip I would share is put away distractions. We talked earlier in the episode about the impact of the volume of distractions coming at us. Most of us have email, text, WhatsApp, social media notifications, Teams, Slack, Zoom, you name it. There's just a never-ending bombardment of professional, social, and personal notifications coming at us on a daily basis. So if we want to truly listen and engage in active listening, we need to minimize some of those distractions. As a starting point, turn off the notifications, or put your device to one side when you are in a one-to-one, virtual, face-to-face, or indeed a team meeting. If you are in a meeting, that's your focus, put your distractions to one side. The next tip is use silence to your advantage. Don't rush in. Silence is uncomfortable. For many of us, we speak just to fill that void. But sometimes holding the line, leaving that silence is critical, because there may be more that the person you are with wants to say. They may be building up the courage, or they may be organizing their thoughts to be able to say more. Don't close that window immediately. They will invariably step into it. They will express more. It will give you a better context, and it will demonstrate that you are not being driven by your ego or that urgency bias to quickly deliver a solution and move them out of the way. Be comfortable with that silence. It's something we'll all struggle with, but use it to your advantage. Tip number 3, ask clarifying questions. Once you've left that little bit of silence, once you feel like you've got an understanding, just engage with the right curiosity, the right questions, to make sure you are 100% certain you've got the context and the emotional sort of backdrop to this situation. And also, it shows that you are not rushing to the answer. Again, all these lead back to the same theme. It gives people a sense that you are truly present with them. You are really listening, because to enable you to ask those clarifying questions, you need to have truly listened. And that is then witnessed by the person you're meeting. It gives them a higher sense of value that my leader is truly present with me, is listening, and now is asking those deeper clarifying questions to really understand where I am and where I want to go. The next tip is don't interrupt. Now, this feels like it's pulling against the previous tip. Ask clarifying questions. I still want you to ask the questions, but let people finish. It aligns back into the second tip. Use silence to your advantage. Let people fill that space. When they've finished, then ask the clarifying questions. It's so easy to dive in. You think they're there and you interrupt. That's what I see happening time and time again, all for the reasons we've talked about. That ego bias of, let me show you the answers. That urgency bias, let me get this out of the way. Don't interrupt. I'm not saying you have to sit with someone for 3 or 4 hours, but if you're brutally honest with yourself and you think of some of the interactions you've had recently, you'll be able to find a number of examples where somebody was in the flow of telling you something and you just jumped straight in. You interrupted, you talked over them, you used your seniority to say, I know what to do, I understand the problem, let's just get on with it. The next tip to consider is always present a summary of what you hear. It's easy to feel you've got a full handle on what's been shared with you by your colleague, but sometimes our perception isn't always aligned with the reality. I see this a lot in all forms of communication. One of the easiest ways to avoid that is a quick summary. I've listened to what you've shared with me. This is how I see the situation, and you surmise it. If there is a disconnect, it's immediately recognizable and can be resolved there and then. It's also another simple but powerful tool to make people feel seen and heard. Just like the clarifying questions, if you can surmise the situation, the flow of a meeting, it shows that you have been 100% focused in and you've not missed a beat. Very hard to do that if you're multitasking, if you're listening while finishing an email. People sense that pretty quickly, and you'll sense it because you can't succinctly surmise what's just been discussed because you've been in and out of the discussion whilst you've allowed your attention to wander, multitasking or picking up distractions or other messages that come in during the course of that particular meeting. My next tip is give praise where praise is due. Sometimes in the process of your one-to-one meetings, people are going to present a problem, a challenge, a frustration, an area where they're struggling. Step one is to listen and to hear that. But step two is to take the opportunity to praise them for having the courage to speak up, for identifying that particular skills gap or knowledge gap and sharing it, or to raise an issue or something where they see standards waning within the organization or within their day-to-day interactions. So where there is a need to praise, praise. Does that link directly into active listening? You're saying, well, how does that tie together? Well, it ties together because you want people to feel that psychological safety. As we said, we want to active listen for a reason. It's to help everybody perform better. So there are little strands running off it, if you will. And one of the strands is when you're listening, you hear things. If you hear something that is admirable or has taken courage, recognize it, reinforce it. Goes right back to my point that I keep using in this episode around enhancing people's sense of value. They feel seen, heard, and valued. They're going to keep coming to you with feedback, with areas of development that they need you supporting, with areas where standards are slipping or areas that they can see within the business that could be improved. That's that feedback loop that every leader wants. You want to be able to see the good and the bad, and you want to be able to encourage people to feel comfortable doing it. If you don't praise it, then maybe they'll lack the confidence to do it again in the future. Praise it, it's embedded, it's anchored in, and they will continue to do that with you. I want you to consider the next tip and really sit with this for a second and allow your ego to pass by. Ask them for their suggested solution before you present your solution. Now, it's very, very difficult for us in leadership positions to not hear a problem, deliver the solution. And there is a space and a time for that. But before you drop in your solution, there are a myriad of benefits in asking people for their suggested solution. It reaffirms that sense of value further. It shows that you're present and that you're listening. But also, from a productivity point of view, you want people knowing that you're going to ask them for their suggestion and ideas. They can't just come to you almost in a childlike manner and say, I have a problem. And equally, you want high levels of accountability and ownership. If people present their own solutions and you marginally tweak and correct it, they have a far higher sense of ownership than if they've just listened to be presented with the solution that you want them to deliver. So I know we're drifting into the world of communication and feedback here, but active listening is a start, and we have to capture all the opportunities that come out as a consequence. We're building that trust. We're building that psychological safety. We've got that innovation coming through. There's also an opportunity here to drive accountability and ownership by asking people for their solution first. And if it's aligned with yours, then you can reaffirm it and say, great idea. That's exactly what I was thinking we should do. And if it's not right, then nothing lost. You can course correct and say, well, that's not a bad suggestion, but let's just dig into that a bit more deeply and let's just build a bit more context to it. So I'm not saying you automatically approve their plan, but give them a chance to suggest their plan first. Last but not least, the final tip, practice it daily. It's no use being an active listener on a Monday, and then as the stress of the week builds and the to-do list expands, we lose our ability. We go straight back into that urgency bias. We just deliver solutions and push things away without truly listening. I'm not saying it's a skill you can master overnight, but like every skill, repetition and consistent application makes it far easier to call on this as part of your leadership DNA. And I promise, I assure you, if you become a leader that is synonymous with really listening, true presence with their staff, then you will find a higher level of connectivity and trust, and you will find it so much easier to recruit additional talent into your team, because people will let it be known that you are a listener, you are a leader, that truly listens and truly cares about the thoughts, emotions, and ideas of their team members. I wish you the very best of luck in the implementation. Do let me know how you get on. Thanks for listening to the Lonely Leader podcast. I'd be very grateful if you could share and follow if the content resonates. And if you're looking for additional free resource to support your continued growth and development, then please do check out our social media and website details in the show notes. Remember, quality leadership on the outside must always start within.